Hi everyone, it's Joseph Harwood, and I'm bringing you my podcast experience, Agitprop Interviews. I fell in love with podcasts after finding out how relaxing and interesting they could be. In this series, I will be sharing stories. I will be delving into different facets of what I'm interested in, from food to lifestyle to travel to spirituality, and I'm very excited to share this from an LGBT perspective. Please enjoy them. They're always peppered with things that make me a little bit more curious, and hopefully they'll make you a little bit more curious too. Today's episode will be an interview with the incredible Dusty O, or the artist formerly known as Miss Dusty O. One of my inspirations, and often remarked as the matriarch of the London drag scene, she was a huge figurehead when I was growing up and going to all these incredible venues in London. Now, I was always in awe of her makeup, and I always thought when I was a little kid and trying to learn my own way around makeup, how does she do it? Because there wasn't access to all of the incredible products today. But she was a Vivienne Westwood clad superhero and definitely an important figure in British queer nightlife. Dusty has since stopped doing drag. I think the industry changed quite drastically, as we spoke about in this interview, and she is now a curator of Pride in London's queer art exhibition. So she has been doing so many different things within artistic expression, which I think is really incredible because it just shows how many facets you can show to the world and create in. Now, we did this interview last year, and I really wanted it to be kept until I could really share these podcasts properly with my audience. When I initially started the Agitprop podcast, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, but I wanted to test the waters out and see if I could reach enough people to make it a viable podcast. So I had no links to my mainstream YouTube, I had no links to my mainstream social media, and was running it mostly on my website. So because I really tribute and honour Dusty O, I think she's fantastic and a huge inspiration to me, I wanted to say this with the right timing. So it's been kept a little while, but I think it just makes all for the better. So please enjoy and let me know what you think, and don't forget to share on your social media. So, thank you for being on the podcast. It's really exciting for me because we always used to consider you as kind of like this massive matriarch of the London drag scene and someone that was so influential and doing things like way before I think drag was taken seriously. You were making it into an art form. And do you embrace that, or how do you feel about it?
I was always I was quite selfish about things. I was doing it for me, you know what I mean? I never intended to be that, and I was never that comfortable with it either, to be honest, because I don't know, I think if you sort of set yourself up into that position, if you start thinking of yourself as this matriarch, this mother of drag or whatever, then you're really setting yourself up as a role model. And I was always far too flawed, and am far too flawed to be anyone's role model. I always say that. So I think it puts you in a kind of delicate and dangerous position. I would always say to anyone, like, you have to find your own way, you know, you have to find your own way of doing things and living. I can't tell you how you should and should. And also that there are no rules to that life, you know, you make your own rules, and quite rightly so, you know. So yeah, it was something that just went with the job, because I was older, because I've been doing it for a long time. You know, most of the people I worked with were half my age, so I suppose it's natural. But to be entirely honest, I was never totally comfortable with it.
So when I was younger, I used to always think that drag was almost a bit kind of cheesy. I don't know, I don't mean that to disrespect drag because I love it, but it was not like an edgy, cool thing until I started to learn about more of the London scene, which you were a big part of, because people in London were not taking the mickey out of themselves. They were becoming almost like a superhero in fashion and gorgeous makeup, and it wasn't a joke, it was more serious. And I remember seeing a picture by Gothra where you had these three gorgeous Vivienne Westwood looks.
6 different looks. It took a whole day to do that one picture. It was constantly like changing outfits and things, and I had to get 6 looks together. And obviously makeup was slightly different on different looks and things. So it was just a whole day for that one single picture, but it was a beautiful picture. I loved that picture.
Oh my God, me too. And there's so many amazing pictures of you. And I have been following you since I was a kid. So I did, I did remember them all. But did it always start off as drag? Is that how you would define it?
But it wasn't drag. I didn't do like titty drag until I was about 23. but I always, from the age of sort of 16, was very androgynous looking. And, you know, in those days, that we're talking about sort of 1984, 83. So it was kind of fashionable. It was just the thing that everyone was doing. It was a bit sort of like that whole gothy emo look that sort of happened later on. We did that sort of in the early 80s. It was just after the New Romantic movement, and basically it was kind of like fashion, really. If you wanted to be a bit edgy, if you wanted to sort of develop a look of your own and things, that was the direction that most people went in. And yeah, it was just something that I embraced at a quite early age. I was always fascinated with makeup, and I think because I always had quite a complex about myself not being very attractive, makeup was and hair and clothes and everything was great disguise. But I never considered myself drag in those days, and it only really became drag when I moved to London, really.
So, what was the reason that you moved into more of that traditional drag? Was it to open up more work opportunities?
Not at all. It was I moved to London in 1989, and there was a club on at the time called Kinky Glinky, and
I've heard stories.
I always loved nightclubs, always loved dressing up and everything. And I was working, I'd got like a proper job, but going out 3 or 4 times a week. And Kinky Glinky was kind of like just a crazy fashion drag club. It was like a giant version, I suppose, a mixture of Tranny Shack and Circus and Boombox, and it was like a huge version of that. And they used to have massive parties in Leicester Square, and I'd say like about 3/4 of the people would go in some form of drag. And that was when, for me, initially, like drag became sort of fashiony mixed in with fashion. And that was always what I was more interested in. And I just kind of started like being a bit more experimental, like, you know, sort of doing the boobs, doing the swimming costumes and showing it all off and everything. And because everyone else was doing it, it didn't seem, there wasn't really issues about sort of gender or anything like that. It was just fun. It was just a laugh. And me being me, I always took it to extremes, and I wanted it to look perfect, you know. And so that was when I started initially doing drag, and proper drag with boobs and padded hips and big wigs and things, because I'd always had my own hair, but
Yeah.
obviously I wanted bigger hair. So, and that was when it sort of drifted into drag. And I never ever really wanted to do that as a living. I never wanted to be a drag queen. I never wanted to be a DJ. It just sort of like slipped into place and carried on far too long, to be honest.
Quite a few years ago, one of my friends actually introduced me to this incredible person. I'm not going to bring her up on the podcast, but she basically maintained her home as if she was still going out to the Kinky Kalinki Club. So I got to see loads of old pictures and funny things, and it was like a time capsule, and it was crazy because I felt I'd almost missed out.
Yeah, but I felt the same about the Blitz Club and things like that. You know, I was just slightly too young for the Blitz and slightly out of sync with Taboo. So I sort of like hit London just after those. So how you feel about Kinky is how I feel about those. So I do get that. And a lot of people as well, you know, they get so wrapped up in that existence. And it was, you know, it was a fabulous, fun time. I suppose they just hold on to it, and like you say, their lives become a time capsule. And that very much that happened to me, but a lot later. You know, I held on to things, you know, 20 years after all that. And sometimes you really need a good clear out, don't you? And just think, okay, life is about now. This is what's going on.
Yeah.
There was nowhere that you could just walk in and get something fabulous off the peg. You know, you had to go for it. And I think that's the difference about now, really, because you only have to sort of go online, don't you? And you can get a decent lace from. We didn't have the internet. There was no internet.
No, of course. And I find it fascinating because I traveled a lot when I was younger, and I used to think, like, why is there more of a color range for foundations in Asia than there was in the UK? I was like, you could get a pale foundation there and you couldn't get one here. Everything was quite distant and difficult to do.
I used to do a mixture. I used to like to get that really pale base. I used to mix different foundations, and I used to mix a Lancome one with a Dior one. And it sounds like there were two sort of like totally different sort of textures and everything. But I found that just through experimentation, really, that that mixing these two together got a nice concretey base, and you know, covered everything, and it was
A la
just
Paris, yes.
pale enough.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And what was it about Vivienne Westwood that you kind of fell in love with? Because I've seen you on This Morning, and I've seen you do an auction show where you spoke about your collection of Westwood stuff. Was she important to you in your self-expression?
Oh God, yeah, she always was. The first sort of like, well, from when I was 16, really, because she was the point of reference that everyone sort of aspired to, you know. All the club kids wanted Vivienne. I was talking about her bondage trousers actually today, because I gave my last pair of Vivienne bondage trousers away to a friend who I work with now today. And I said, well, there was like a hierarchy of Westwood bondage of bondage trousers, not Westwood bondage trousers. That if you were like quite poor or studenty or whatever, you always bought the bondage trousers from Kensington Market, and they were about 15 quid or something. And then when you got a little bit more money, you'd buy a pair from Boy London. And then when you got a little bit more than that, that's when you went to Vivienne and got the Vivienne. So there was like a hierarchy of like bondage trousers. And Vivienne was always the top of everything. And I always wanted to be perfect, you know. I always wanted my look to be real, to be nice, to look beautiful, and to be genuine and everything. So yeah, I used to worship at the throne of Auntie Viv quite heavily for many years. She was brilliant in a day, though. She was. And I mean, I'm not going to say she's gone off the boil now, but she doesn't do it herself now anyway, does she? Her husband does it. But for me now, it's not where I want to be. But in those days, it was kind of like a mixture of fuck off and fashion and sort of prestige, I suppose. She always had, well, she invented punk, didn't she, with Malcolm, you know, invented that movement. And then she, you know, pretty much dressed everyone through the new romantic movement. She was absolutely, you know, a force to be reckoned with for years and years and years. And such a force of creativity. I think it's quite sad now how she's not as rated as she used to be, you know, but then she's an old lady now. She doesn't do much herself, and she can live on a legacy, because a legacy is good enough. It stands by anything, I think. And now she just, you know, rabbits on about the environment and
Yes, with the Julian Assange stuff and the canary in the cage, I find her just a bit more contradictory than I used to now, because sometimes I used to be so like amazed by the gall that she had when she would go on TV and talk about the royals, and then she's just like aligned herself with the Prince Charles's charity about the environment. So it's interesting how she's changed her position in some ways. Even though I do support the Prince's Trust as I'm an ambassador and things like that. But I'm fascinated by the contradiction sometimes, but she is an icon to me.
considering in her punk years, she had T-shirts with "Abolish the Monarchy" and "The
Yeah.
Queen is dead" and all things like that. But you know what? The thing that I love about her, she contradicts herself constantly, and I do think sometimes she talks absolute rubbish, and sometimes she talks like a genius, you know. But the most important thing that she's doing is talking and is being heard and is putting stuff out there. You don't have to agree with it, you know. And I think that's, even if you don't agree with the message itself, the fact that she's just doing it, she's this old lady, the queen of punk, you know, and like she's still got something to say, she's still doing her stuff. I think it's marvellous.
Yes, me too. I still like, if ever I get to the point where I can go back to Tokyo, there's an amazing shop in Tokyo called Closet Child, and all they sell is vintage Vivienne Westwood and that elegant gothic Lolita where they were dressed like dolls.
I've been there.
I loved it. When I went there, I was like, oh my god, I wanted to buy it. Like, I couldn't when I was a kid, but
everything's really small sizes in Japan, don't you find? And you are tiny though, aren't you? So
I'm 6'3", so I'm tall, so I can fit skinny clothes, but they don't fit me lengthwise. I have to always the belt panel.
But you are thin. I've seen you're thin.
Oh, I'm a little bit. I think because I'm built wide. I've got like wider shoulders, but that's always why I liked all the Anglomania stuff, because it always kind of draped and disguised the shoulder.
Yeah. Well, you've got to have something to hang it off.
Absolutely.
It looks nice, you know.
Apart from Westwood, did you have any like massive kind of figures in your kind of like stratosphere that you thought, wow, that is triggering something in me? Was there anyone else?
People or
People or
yeah,
music or
I was
musicians?
yeah. Well, from when I was a little kid, when I was 14, I was a massive Culture Club fan because obviously he was so visible. Boy George was so visible. And for any sort of like out of town freaks that hadn't got access to clubs and discos and fashion and things, he was the first point of call when his career started, and he was in the papers and music magazines and things. And so yeah, he was a huge influence. But I was a baby, you know, I was 15, 14, and but he's just that desire, that individuality, that fuck you all, I'll do what I want to do. If I want to wear lipstick, I'll wear lipstick. And believe me, in those days, if you chose to wear it on the street and you were a man, you were expect a slap in the face, especially where I'm from. And it just, he was a sort of like a beacon, I suppose, for a sad little life, because I always wanted more, you know, from a little village in the Midlands, and I thought, there's got to be more than this boring rubbish. And then he appears and opened the door, really. So I've always got George sort of to thank for that. But obviously then later on I became friends with him when I moved to London, so that was kind of a surreal experience when your idol becomes your friend, you know.
Absolutely, and I've seen the pictures of you and Boy George and Pete Burns, who I when because he was on the Big Brother show when I was growing up in school, and I was just like, oh my god, this person talks like me. They're crazy. I love them. But you were friends with Pete Burns too, weren't you?
Yeah, I miss Pete a lot. I just miss the drama that he brought to everyone's life, you know, because he was very chaotic, very enigmatic, very intelligent, very self-destructive, kind of crazy person. He was so many things, and he could be completely changeable. One day he was this, then another he was that. But he was fascinating. Out of all of the people I've ever met in my you know, my whole existence during the clubs and blah blah blah, Pete was the most interesting, without doubt.
I was 16, and me and my friend, we snuck into Circus, and it was the first time we'd gone out in London together, and he was there. So, and it was like just being in the periphery was enough for me because I was so in awe of him. But it was, I wish I could have met him as an adult, because obviously I think Gothra did his makeup at some point, and when I did a couple of the shoots, it was like, oh my god, I'm 1 degree of separation for him from him.
Pete was a very strange person. He didn't used to really like other androgynes particularly. It was kind of, all Pete was interested in was Pete. You know, didn't
Okay.
have much interest in anything else or anyone else unless you were contributing to him being Pete. And that, I don't say that in a nasty way. I say it in a factual way. Anyone who knows Pete, who knew Pete, would say exactly the same. There was one thing that Pete cared about, and that was him. You know, and if other people, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, whatever." You know, he'd seen it all and anyway and done it all. So it was kind of like, "Oh, okay, so she's got blue eyebrows. So fucking what?" Yeah, that was what he was like. He was very funny.
Oh, do you think that there was a big kind of like difference between the people of that era that grew up in the north, like in the Liverpool and Eric's kind of scene, and then people that grew up in the Blitz in the south scene? Like, because I think like people in the north end of the country were a bit more kind of like masculine in their kind of like socialization. So like, I always thought like, whereas Boy George can read someone and incredibly witty in his retorts, Pete Burns was more like scary, like a man.
If you upset him, he'd hit you. You know, and he was hard as well. He was really tough person. You wouldn't mess with Pete. You really, really wouldn't mess with him. I've seen him batter people.
Oh
So
God.
yeah, he was like a child of punk, you know, and like
Mhm.
he had what when if you look back at the early pictures of Pete in sort of the late 70s, how he looked then was so extreme, even compared to the punks, you know, it was way beyond sort of anything that they'd known really. And to survive in that world, you've got to be tough, you know. I've got friends in Birmingham. I was never a tough person. I was always a weedy one that hid behind the tough ones. But I knew sort of drag and really androgynous people, really extreme people, and they had to be tough, you know. And I saw someone once on a bus, one of my friends, take his stiletto off and stiletto someone in the back of the head who was like abusing him. And things like that. And then later on, picking hairs out of the heel, going, oh, that must have been that one who I eat. But it was a different world in those days. And, you know, it could be very, very violent. And it was a bit scary. But I think people were braver as well, though. They had to be, you know.
Yeah, I think so too. I think, and the ability to create this fantastical image when there isn't the accessible stuff that you can get now. You'd have to go through so much more of a process to choose to stand out. I always think like there's more of a strength in that than there is today, whereas being different almost is mainstream in some degree. Like the more sensational you can make yourself look today, it will give you an Instagram, which people think is like a currency.
Well, you can do it without going out, can't you?
Yeah.
And anyone can be brave in their living room or in their bedroom with a mum and dad sitting downstairs. Anyone can, you know, it doesn't take much gumption, really. Try doing that 30 years ago, getting a bus an hour and a half into the nearest town with all the yobbos shouting things, throwing things at you, chasing you through the town just to get to where you want to go and be with a few like-minded people, you know.
Yeah.
It was a lot tougher, a lot more. You had to be a lot more determined, I think. But I'm not saying that's a totally good thing, though, really, because I think it's great that people can be creative in privacy and they can, you know, if that's all they want to do, if they don't want to go out and meet like-minded people, if they just want to talk to them through an iPad or whatever,
yeah,
fine. At least they're doing it, you know, at least they're trying, which is nice.
yeah. I feel like now that drag has become this sort of talking point in mainstream media and RuPaul's Drag Race has been on TV, I've become more masculine, I think, as a result of people knowing what drag is. Now it's become accessible. I almost feel like I want to do the opposite of what's accessible and just to be still a point of view that's different. And do you think like all of this stuff that's happened within the RuPaul's Drag Race phenomena, do you think it's done good or bad for LGBT culture and drag queens in general?
Well, it's a really difficult that one, that is. It's one that I'm still actually working on, to be honest. I haven't can come to a final conclusion about it yet. It's, in some respects, it's brilliant that it's reached out and it's become what it's become and people are seeing it and, you know, some people are understanding it more and understanding people's need to be different and have their own identity and blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, the downside of it is that it's all become a bit sort of Big Brother, hasn't it? It's like, if you're going to dress up, you draw a line down your nose with a little silver dot on the end and you do this and you do that. And if you don't do that, you're not doing it properly. Well, that's not entirely how I see it, you know. So, and also, you know, when something, I always saw drag as a bit like being the suffragettes of the LGBT community. You know, we were the ones that got the slaps around the head. We were the ones that were shouted at. We were the visible ones, the obvious ones, the ones that were sticking their fingers up to the world and saying we're going to do it our way. And now it's not really like that. Now it's been a little bit tamed down. It's been a bit cleansed. It's all a bit more safe, and I don't know if drag should be that, you know, but as I say, I haven't come to a final conclusion on it. I'm sitting on the fence, to be honest.
It's difficult because it's like we live in this kind of like reality star driven world where people have, like, especially gay people, I didn't think they could possibly have imagined that their outcome could have been like the Kardashians. But Drag Race has almost created an outlet for gay people to get that reality star experience. And it's like, well, do you want to be a reality star or do you want to be transgressive with the way you look? And if you are transgressing the way you look, what the hell are you saying? And it's become like so, like as you said, it's like a uniform of what is drag in that moment. And
Yeah.
then the people that do, like Matthew Anderson, who did RuPaul's makeup, he was like doing different looks every single time he did one of these looks with Zaldi in the New York club scene. And that's what was inspiring to me. It was the ability to be different every time. So it's like this
Yeah.
similarity, I think, is sad, because it's like you don't even see what the person thinks anymore. You can kind of see what people thought by the way they express themselves. Now, who knows?
It, it's been sanitized, hasn't it? Really,
Yeah.
sanitized a lot.
Well,
And I don't know if that's a good thing. Most things get sanitized, though, don't they? If you look at sort of like we were talking about Vivian earlier, Vivian was sanitized and has been sanitized to a degree, compared to how it was in the 70s and early 80s. But I think most things do get sanitized eventually. They become a bit when people have what did they say? Popularity breeds contempt, doesn't it? Once people are familiar with something and they become more exposed to it, it becomes less interesting after a while.
very true, very true. But you can think about like how people getting their lips done, and when Pete Burns was on like Big
Yeah.
Brother, it was like a maelstrom around it, and it's
Yeah.
like the girls that are on Geordie Shore look more extreme than he looked.
Oh, you see some of them now. It's like, oh Jesus, Peter had been having his took off, I think.
Yeah. Did you think like when you were working at Shack and you were working there for such a long time, and then there started to be this movement where people were saying the word tranny is no longer an acceptable word? Like, what did you think about all of this?
I always used to say, if I want to call myself, I'll call myself, because I think I'd earn the right to, and it was me calling it me. But we finished just as that was sort of like really starting to kick in. We had talked about changing it because we didn't want to offend anyone, because simply it was a business, but it was a very cherished business. It was one that we loved. So I loved it immensely and put a lot of passion, time, and effort into the whole scenario. And the object of it wasn't to upset anyone. And so I would have changed the name if I would have genuinely thought people were hurt by it or it was doing any form of damage. Um, I would have gone with it because it was never my objective to upset anyone. I wanted that night to bring happiness and fun and love and a sense of family. So I would have changed it, and I can understand some of the reasoning around sort of people being upset by it. But I think it's a little bit of a storm in a bra cup, really, isn't it? It's like there are more important and bigger issues than that
Yeah.
need to be addressed faster and with vehemence and some vigor than that, really.
It's always been amazing to me that, like, because I was raised around like, older drag queens, and so many of my older friends are like, why the hell are these young people even chit chatting about this? Like, thank God they're not throwing bricks at you, let alone calling you God's sake.
Exactly. And there's very much a sense of preciousness in the current environment, which well, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad. It's not for me to say.
When you stopped doing drag, was it kind of like everything happening at once? It was, or were you planning to stop doing drag and choose to do your artwork in a different way?
I think it would have happened eventually anyway, but it was kind of forced on me in a series of events that occurred. It was, and in retrospect, it was the perfect time, and what happened for a reason. And there was like a series of quite horrible things that happened to me, and that finished it off, that put the nail in the coffin. It took it out of my hands, really. I didn't make that decision in my head, I will finish this now. It was kind of finished for me, put on hold, and in the meantime I had to survive. And it was in the course of that sort of like year, really, after the club had gone, that I found a path that I felt that I could go down that was as fulfilling and gave me an identity and gave me some validation and made me happy. But the initial choice of, shall I end all this today? No, because the club was doing well, Shack had been going 10 years and we were still getting full. It was busy, you know. It would have, and we were doing not just Tranny Shack at Jojo's, we were doing Tranny Shack North, at the Cat, Shack South, at the Eagle, Tranny Shack East, at that place, Wayne Charles's place. We were touring with it. We'd done an album. We'd done a book. You know, it was very much a going concern. But then Jojo's had their big drama, which I'm not going to go into for legal reasons.
Sure.
And it was closed, and we could have taken it, I suppose, somewhere else. There was a couple of options. But Walt and I, who ran it, preferred to sort of just give it a rest, to be honest. We felt we needed to just rest and see what happened. But then there was, so obviously that was sort of my biggest income gone overnight.
Yeah.
But then there was a series of personal events that kind of each one put the nail in the coffin of that happening. And to be honest, I had to get a job. I was forced into getting a job. But I was, at the time when it closed, I was in Panto at Leicester Square Theatre, and I knew that, which is really well paid, but I knew that when that finished, I would have like so many months before that I'd got enough money to survive before I had to really do something. And I just sort of like decided then, really. When I was slapped with a big tax investigation, a 7-year tax investigation, which had it not gone my way, would have put me in prison probably.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was terrible. And we were burgled, and they took all Mark's electric stuff, his computer and everything. So, and he needed that to work, and he needed it for his visa. So there was like, the potential was kind of like awful, you know, penniless, possible prison. My partner was possibly having to go back to Japan because he couldn't work here because his livelihood had been taken away from him. It was just a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare.
Oh, I'm so sorry you went through that.
It wasn't very nice, but gradually you put the bricks together again, don't you? And start building again, and it takes time, and it's not always easy. For me, it was very difficult because I sort of felt I'd lost my identity of who I was. You know, I was Dusty O, but really I wasn't Dusty O, was I? I was pretending to be Dusty O.
Yeah.
The real me was under there somewhere, but I had to find him out and let him out again and introduce him to the world and get used to being that person and not the other person. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of adjustment. And I'm still not there, I would say. 5 years on, I'd say I'm still not totally there, but, you know, I'm getting there.
I totally get it. Because I didn't even imagine ever thinking of myself looking like a boy, and I play with this boy image sometimes, and I think, oh my God, these people in Starbucks still call me ma'am, and I'm like, I've got a fake beard painted on, and I'm like, because I don't know how to do it. It's like, and I don't know how to do all these stuff, and it's like,
yeah, preach yourself again.
Yeah. But hey, it's like a phoenix rising from the ashes, and you've done so many incredible things since stop being a public drag persona, and you've started to create this incredible artist kind of career, which your paintings are so incredible, and you use different mediums, and it's very bright and colourful, and everything's very graphic. Like, did you always want to do paintings like this, or like was this just an amazing moment that just happened?
No, it happened. I never wanted to be. I never wanted to be a drag queen, really, and earn my money that way. But the art thing, I think after about 6 or 7 months, I was working in a theatre. I was duty manager, and it was a really boring job. It was basically sitting people down and counting Pringles in a stock take. Absolutely hellish. So I'd got no creative outlet, really. But I mean, I liked the job. It had saved my neck, you know what I mean? It had saved me from being thrown out of my house and God knows what. But I had there was nothing creative going on. I'd been signed to do Panto the next year, but that was like 6 months away. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? You know, this is like killing me. I hadn't been out, hadn't been to clubs. I wasn't doing any fashions. I was sort of living a very quiet, introverted life at home. Mark, who'd done a lot of art and, you know, has an art background, just said, well, why don't you do a little bit of painting? And got me some like really cheap little paints from the pound shop, I think, and a couple of little canvases that he'd got knocking around. And I sat there and I fiddled around and did 3 or 4 of these little tiny canvases. just for something to do. Put them, as you do, put them on Facebook, everything, your life. And someone offered to buy them, and I was like, what? You want to buy them? They're rubbish. And but so I sold them anyway, to cut a long story short. And then I just thought, I like doing this. It's really therapeutic. And when I started painting things that I had some meaning to me, I started to sort of understand what a process was, the process of like, you have to live, you have to go through things, you have to experience things to make what you produce have any value, to have any part of you in it, you know what I mean? To sort of, to be an expression of who you are and what you want to say. And it happened slowly. At first I was just doing like little pop art pictures of pop stars and things, and then gradually began to explore sort of like my own feelings about things, particularly about gender and sexuality. And a lot of my pictures, even though they're I use bright colours and things like that, they're quite dark if you read them as they're intended to be read. They're not always happy pictures. And gradually I sort of began to explore that a little bit more, and it became more and more interesting to me, that sort of side of it, and also like a therapy to get me through what I'd been through, because I needed some form of like self-expression, some form of validation. I needed to find out who I was, and it helped me do, and it is still helping me do that. And then we did the first, someone said to me, let's do an exhibition. It was my friend who owned an art cafe. Her brother's autistic, and they'd opened this cafe for him, really, to display his art and for him to cook in, and because he's very capable autistic. And they said, why don't you come and do an exhibition? So I just put like, I think it was 15 prints, and they sold, and I was quite surprised. And then I started getting loads of orders and things for prints, which was brilliant. And then it sort of dawned on me that, yeah, actually, this is something that you love. This is something that you could actually make into a kind of career, though I didn't really want it to be a career. I wanted it because I was frightened that it would then become something that I didn't enjoy doing, or I felt that I had to do. So I always have kept it balanced. I have a part-time job, and my painting takes up 2 or 3 days a week, but it's not everything. I like that balance of having the two things, because also painting's quite introverted, and you're quite isolated while you're doing it. And for me, that's not necessarily a great thing for my mental health. I need stimulation from people,
Yeah.
But it was kind of like a little journey, and it just grew as it went along. And I've always had this motto with this particular project, art, not to try too hard, to just let things happen. Because whenever in my life I've ever attempted to manipulate situations for my advantage, or to get work or whatever, they've always gone wrong. So I thought, well, with this one, let's just not have too many expectations. Let's not make a plan. Let's just do it and see what happens. And it kind of is still doing its own little thing, really. Like, it changes all the time. The exhibitions got bigger and a bit glitzier, and then I got a backer, and then there was the Parliament thing, and then I was asked to curate the 52 thing for Pride, and now my work's been stocked in 2 galleries, and that's never happened before. That only started last week, commercial availability. So yeah, it's just, but I have no plan. I don't think to myself, you're going to be the next Grayson Perry. You're going to, I'm not ambitious about it. I just have to let it do its thing, and that's fine.
I love that some of your paintings almost look like there's like a tribalism like in it. I can't really describe it. It's like subculture. They're so distinct though, and I always think like with LGBT people, like we, in this time, in this era, we've always been kind of like suppressed, and we've been told that what we are is not right. But then you go back through all these historical cultures, and you see LGBT people that have always done these kind of like storytelling or artistic outlets, or they were the shaman, and there's something that just happens, and it's drag is kind of a form out of it, I guess, but there's always this kind of like underlying magical stuff that needs to come out of us, and it's always like there's an element to that so much in your work that I think stands out. Do you?
So,
It definitely does. It's all colourful and magical.
I don't paint for decoration. Everything has. It's not just like wallpaper. I always say that to people. It has. There is a story. Whether you choose, it's not up to the person who wants the work. Whether what they see in it, that's entirely up to them. Once it's done, it's done. It's gone. I've no interest in it anymore. But there is in every single thing I've ever done, there always has been like a bit of me and a bit of something, a bit of thought or an experience, and putting it down on a canvas. I'm limited in my ability to sort of turn my thought into something visible, in that I've never had art training. I've never, the techniques and things like that I'm still limited with. I'm still experimenting. I'm still pushing and trying to learn how to express those thoughts in a way that they actually look like, when they're finished on the canvas, what's going on in my head.
Yeah. I remember seeing the early pop-up ones you did, and you did the Queen, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I don't know if I've imagined this, but are you like really into the royals, or did you used to be into the royals? Because I thought somewhere in my brain, I remembered reading something you posted on Facebook like many years ago about the royals, and I was like, should I ask that or not? I didn't think if it was my imagination playing tricks on me or not.
But I am really, really interested. But what I'm interested in is power and privilege. And obviously, royalty epitomizes power, privilege, and the status quo. And, that is something that's very, very fascinating to me. And I think what an extraordinary position to be sort of like born and having to do that. You have no say in it. The Queen didn't want to be the Queen, and like, but my interest is slightly broader than that. It's like, I was quite into genealogy, oddly enough, and still am. I could tell you all about every sort of ruling house in Europe, really, and reigning house, or non-reigning, as most of them are now, like the Bourbons, the Habsburgs, the Savoys, the Braganzas in Portugal, the Hohenzollerns in Germany, the Romanovs in Russia, the Windsors in England, the Bernadottes in Sweden, and I know how they're all connected, because obviously it's one family, basically. It's all of the royal families of Europe are one family. They're all related in one way or another. And that had been going on for 1,000 years. And that's interesting, how that happened is really, really interesting. How they held on to the privilege and the power. And now what we've got is kind of like, if you imagine a little island, a little tiny island in the sea, it's only the tip of the island is like the tip of a mountain. Underneath is all much bigger. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's what we have now. What we see is part of like a much bigger institution that reaches into everything, really. And it's bizarre, and it doesn't make any sense, and it's mythical, and it's also not really, I won't say it's wrong, but privilege, when you're born privileged, it's not great, But it's just fascinating, and it fascinates me. So yeah, I do have a fascination with it.
I'm amazed. I want to ask you all questions about the families now. So like, are you seeing like yesterday, for example, people were posting on Twitter that there was a petition or like a display, a riot outside of Buckingham Palace about Prince Andrew, and I think a lot of people feel that there's been this like revelation where this Jeffrey Epstein connection's been kind of minimised, but then there's been this harsh treatment of Meghan Markle. And like, I don't know, what my gut is just to observe at the moment and see what's going on. But do you have an opinion about all of that stuff that's going on?
I don't think it's anything new.
Yeah.
I think if you look back at sort of even, in my lifetime, everyone knows the Duke of Edinburgh played away and was unfaithful to the Queen. And there was a big scandal where he was pictured in some house of ill repute, and his face was faded out, and then if you go further back than that, there's like the Queen's great uncle, who would have been king. He was like well-known gay person, homosexual, he was kind of snuffed out and moved away, sort of thing. And there's always been scandals. They're a family, they're people, they're human. But because they're in this ridiculously strange world that they inhabit, of privilege, of deference, and a world that must be, you know, we can hardly imagine it really, you know, being bowed and scraped to, and, you know, the titles and all that nonsense. They're going to fail, aren't they? Because they're human, and they're put into situations like the Andrew and the Jeffrey Epstein situation. I'm not saying it's the right, you know, I'm not saying it was good what happened, but I don't know many young men, or men of his age even, who, had they been handed something on a plate that appeared to be acquiescing to his desires, that they would have done anything different, really, if they thought that they could get away with it. But it is, I mean, obviously, underage sex is awful. It's wrong. You know, it's wrong to. But did he know? I don't know. I think it's very difficult to judge, and I think, obviously, I don't think Meghan was treated very well, and I think as an institution, it's just fucked up. That's what makes it interesting.
This is why I was so fascinated when they asked me to be a Prince's Trust ambassador, because I go to these awards and I see the Prince walk past and I'm like, this is so weird. All these people are like real people, because I didn't even imagine I would see one of these people in like real life. And then I was like, oh my God, that's actually a real person.
Yeah. And they all think and feel the way we feel, you know, and make mistakes and do bad things and do good things. You know, they are human.
It's a very fascinating world. I have to quiz you another time. Maybe we can get dinner when we're allowed to go out of lockdown and we can talk about it.
I think they must have absolutely vile lives.
I do. I think it's like a cage in so many ways. And I would hate to be just myself in a situation where you kind of have this expectation of being in a straight couple.
Yeah.
Just that on its own.
It's totally bizarre. The whole thing is just totally bizarre, which I think makes it more interesting, really. Yes. But, you know, but Andrew, I don't know Prince Andrew. He could be a nice person that made a terrible mistake and didn't know, or he could be a horrible old lecher that knew exactly what he was doing and manipulated the situation. But I don't think we'll ever entirely know with that, because the powers that be, with the, you know, institutions and the oligarchy in this country, will never let us know, unless there's some form of huge revolution and it all comes out in the wash. But
yes, unless we storm the Bastille and we steal the crown jewels.
But that didn't exactly do good, did it?
No.
You look at it in a historical perspective.
Yes.
They got Napoleon after that, and he was a dictator.
The Russian ones are the ones that I'm so intrigued by. I just think, like, oh my God, because I've read all these like conspiracies about like all the little children being shot, and they found some of the corpses, and some genealogy was meant to be like hidden amongst civilians, and I'm just, oh my God, I love all the.
The Romanovs are really interesting, because it's obviously it's almost, for some people, in living memory. You know, like I remember my nan talking about, you know, the Tsar, my great nan talking about it, and I'm like, oh my God, you remember when that happened? You know, when they murdered the family and things, and the whole thing about like, did they or didn't they? Well, they obviously did, because they've got all the skeletons now, and they've done DNA tests to relatives and everything. So all that nonsense about Anastasia surviving and all things like that. But the thing that fascinates me about that was how stupid they were, and how, you know, it was like, could they not see that coming? Could they not have done anything to it? I would have seen that coming. It was so obvious, and like, oh my God, did you really? They must have actually really, really believed. Well, they did. He did believe that he was God's anointed and that it would all be fine, but it wasn't.
Yes. But who are the people that are around them that are like the kind of unnamed names in history that have protected them from having a realistic viewpoint of the world? I'm always interested in like who, because there must be so many people that have just been like axed out of the history books just because they were a bit different or they didn't want their names in there. But there must be some sort of level of coercion to make people so like oblivious of themselves. I'm like, that's the bit that I find like, who are these people around them? Because they're kind of just been like these rich royals and just not been aware.
The old royalty, like the Romanovs and the Habsburgs and things, they lived in a way that was so not like anyone else. You know, it was just in those palaces are surrounded by, you know, the Tsar he's in his personal retinue 1,000 people, so there was someone to do everything, you know, and everything was so regulated by etiquette and rules and things that had been handed down since like Peter the Great and things like that, that literally they functioned in a world and did what they did in a world that no one else could have possibly understood or functioned in themselves had they not been in it, you know. But to them it was normal, it was totally normal, you know, like none of them knew the value of money or anything like that. You know, that was proven sort of when the Tsar's mother, who was Danish, left Russia in the revolution. She went back to Denmark and she took a lot of her jewels with her and sold them all off at ridiculously low prices because she didn't know, and there was no one to tell her that actually, you know, you shouldn't sell that for that. That's worth a bit more than that. And it was just, they just lived in this strange bubble, really, and the Tsar and the Tsarina were very religious as well. They believed in mysticism and all sorts of things like that. And then they had this very sick son who everything was sort of, you know, aimed at getting the son well and passing on the legacy and blah, blah, blah. And it all just went really, really wrong. It should have been, you know, it should have all gone. It should have been wiped away. It was terribly unfair.
Yes.
Could have been done in a nicer way.
Well, talking of selling off jewels, when you stopped doing drag, did you get rid of all your drag stuff? Because it wasn't just drag, it was like bespoke couture fashion pieces.
Over the period of about 3 years, I got rid of, say, 95% of it.
Oh, my God.
No, I don't mind. I was never going to wear it again. I'm never going to be a size 12. Do you know what I mean? And what good is 20 pairs of Westwood Gillies when I don't wear shoes like that anymore?
Yeah.
No, it was very useful. I was glad that I had it because when I needed it, it saved my neck. But it has all gone, yeah.
That's funny. That's a good way to look at it. They were like your paints of that era.
They were my assets.
Yes.
Buy wisely. I thought, and I say that to people now. I still say, oh, well, when you buy, you know, if you're buying designer, think about whether in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, that's going to be something that you're going to be able to make money on. I mean, I sold a lot of my stuff for more than I actually paid for it. So, you know, I was always very careful about what I bought.
That's very wise to everyone listening. So, have you got any exhibits?
Shit.
Yeah. Do you have any exhibits or any work, because you said you've done lots of work through lockdown, have you got anything coming up that people need to know about?
At the moment, I curated the first LGBTQ plus London Pride in London art exhibition, which unfortunately is only online, but it's called 52 because it's been 52 years since decriminalisation of homosexuality. And we wanted one piece of work for each year since decriminalisation. So we chose 52 artists. Well, they submitted work, and then we had a procedure where people like Sue Perkins and Denise Welsh and some really well-known artists went through all the submissions, and they curated 100 pieces which were then presented to me, and I've curated the final 52. So there's that's going on now, and we're hoping that once COVID's finished, we're going to be able to exhibit that properly in a gallery. There was a lot of talk from really good galleries of wanting to do it, because it's a first, you know, it's the first of its kind, really. Nothing's happened like that in this country before. So yes, hopefully this one will, after COVID, will be made public in a gallery, as opposed to just being visible online. But we're going to do one next year as well. It's done really well. And it's been a big help to the artists as well, because the work's for sale. 30% goes to Pride to help fund their different projects, and the rest goes to the artists, which, as you know, in COVID times, we're all a bit broke. So if people want to buy one, then please do, because you are supporting the LGBTQ queer community by doing so. And yeah, so that's all going well. And as I said before, my own stuff, all pretty, talks of exhibitions and things is very much on hold at the moment, because what's the point? You know, you can't plan. So I've now got pieces in Subversion Gallery. I've got 15 pieces in Subversion Gallery in Glasgow, which is sort of contemporary gallery, really sort of quite edgy, I suppose. So, you know, it's a nice little left-wing feel to it, that gallery. And that's the first time my own work's ever been in as limited edition prints, publicly accessible, really. And there's another gallery in England on the coast that I'm in negotiation with at the moment, that are going to be stocking originals, not prints. So yeah, it's just doing stuff, you know, it's just doing its own thing, really.
That's like, and you've got social media. You're not like a super social media fanatic, though, are you? But you do have all your work on social media.
I post quite a lot. I don't have like 20 million followers like some people for doing nothing, but
yeah.
But then, you know, I'm older, I'm gayer, so
where can
I accept my limitations.
You're at Dusty O is Dead on Twitter is the username, is that right?
O is Dead on Twitter, and on Instagram I'm Art by Dusty O. On Facebook I'm still just Dusty O.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for talking to me.
I often put some of my originals for sale on social media. So if people did want to buy an original, not a print, it's usually better to just come direct to me. And they're not as expensive as people think either.
I will link them all on every website thing I can put it on. So I'm so happy to have spoken to you properly. That was so exciting for me.
Oh, I don't know why. Me banging on.
No, it's interesting. We do have to catch up like properly in person when we're allowed to be sociable.
Do you come up to London?
I do. I come up there now and again for work things. I've been up there 3 times since lockdown, but I used to be up there nearly every week. I just do like random daytime things. I'm not. I need to be more sociable.
Next time you're up, just text me, and if we meet for half an hour for a cup of tea or something somewhere.
Oh, okay, that would be amazing. All right then, lovely. Well, thank you again for taking the time to speak to me, and I will.
Thank you. Very honoured.
Perfect. All right, I'll speak to you soon then.
Thanks, love.
Bye. So, for me, this was an amazing episode, and I can't wait for you guys to give me some feedback and see what you think, because sometimes we have lost the link in the chain when it comes to LGBT history, and the language has changed and intention has changed with language. So I've carefully tried to remove any words in this episode that might be offensive to younger trans people that don't know that that's a way that people used to share endearment, and it was also a very big business within London. Terms have changed and now we adjust, but it's interesting to see that, and I think we can't just dismiss the things that have happened because they make us uncomfortable. We have to still embrace them and talk about them. To me, it was more important to give an open conversation, because I think we need to have a record of all this stuff. We can't just sanitize what's actually been happening during our cultures. We need to actually learn from it and embrace it. So to me, Agitprop was always intended to be a record of things that I wanted you guys to learn from and to embrace, and I was so honoured that Dusty said yes. Please check out all of Dusty's work across their social media, and also send them some love for their incredible paintings, which are probably going to be exhibited, I think, when lockdown opens. So cannot wait. It was an amazing one. Hope you're all doing well. Take care, and I will see you in the next episode.